Hey, welcome into the Future Christian Podcast. My name is Lauren Richmond Jr., and I'm pleased to be joined today by Jose Martinez. Hello.
Hello. Thanks for having
Thanks
me
for
on.
thanks for being here. I'll also give our guests just a fair warning. If you're hearing cartoons in the background, my son is sitting on my lap watching YouTube. So just do me a favor and you know, listen into our voices and enjoy the background music. So let me read Jose is the creator and host of Story Wagon, which we'll be talking about here soon. He's the associate minister at New Church Ministry for the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. So, the Story Wagon organization serves as a mobile resource and listening center focused on spiritual health. The organization's goal is to provide free resources about issues such as grief, moral injury, shame, guilt, and other spiritual health issues that affect the mental health of individuals, community groups, and faith communities. In addition to offering resources, Story Wagon serves the platform for community members who want to share their story. They ensure they are providing a safe space when they are doing so by meeting people where they're at and giving the storytellers an opportunity to be heard without judgment or shame. So, welcome. What else would you like our listeners to know about you?
Just to let people know, I am a chaplain by trade, and I'm a church planter. So, a couple other things that I like to do. And also, I'm a husband and a father of one son.
Nice, nice. Well, welcome, and yeah. So you've probably been here where I'm at right now, literally
Right. Yeah. It's so
balancing
cool. Enjoy these moments. They don't last.
trying to tell myself that, yeah. Um, let's see. Talk about your kind of journey of faith and how you came to the faith and what it looks like today.
Yeah. I'm Latino, on top of everything else. And, my family is traditionally Catholic. When I was growing up, when I was very little, I was baptized in the Catholic Church. And,
Hmm.
being a Latino family, we're culturally Catholic and not necessarily going to Mass all the time. But I remember when I was a little boy going to Mass with my grandmother. It was all in Spanish, of course, because that's the language you speak to God.
Yeah, I
Uh,
thought it was English, Jose. What? What?
my grandfather had a saying like, "You speak French to the diplomats, Italian to the women, German to the horses, and to God you speak to Spanish." With
Hmm.
my grandfather was funny like that.
Yeah.
But but my mom, she was in the military, so we traveled around a lot around the world, and she was a single parent, and she met my dad, and my dad was a Protestant Baptist person. He
Hmm.
grew up Baptist, and so we followed suit and got into the Baptist church. And with the Southern Baptist churches, very very good at children's ministry, and
Yeah.
so I got
Yeah.
involved with the youth group and all this other stuff, and got like baptized, salvation sort of thing. You want to start doing that, and so uh, in high school, and then I sort of rebelled like any other teenager, and I came across uh, independent Christian churches, which my wife was in.
Hmm.
At the time, she was my girlfriend, so I decided to go to church with her because I was trying to impress her.
Of course.
Well, so I got involved with the independent Christian churches, and in college, we were involved with college ministry, and we started getting into church planting at that time. And
Mm.
I was planting churches, helping planting churches. I wasn't a minister.
Hmm.
There was no way I was going to be a minister because in that time I joined the military,
Uh-huh.
and I was doing my military service, and I got deployed to Iraq and Kuwait, and I was in a C-12, which is a fixed wing aircraft,
Hmm.
flying back and forth from Iraq to Kuwait. And during that time, uh, God kind of called me into ministry. And I was like, I don't want to do that.
Right. Of course.
Right. And so I got into seminary when I came back from combat, and just had like this real identity crisis sort of thing because the things
Hmm.
that I was learning in seminary was contradictory to everything that I learned
Yeah. Yeah.
as a conservative Christian. And I went to a very liberal seminary because I wanted to have that full spectrum of
That was your
of
first mistake
Christianity.
right there. Yeah.
Right, there we go, yeah, because I
Yeah.
wanted to be a chaplain.
Yeah.
So, and so, well, and during seminary, I also got into the chaplain candidate program, and so I was
Hmm.
still doing my military service while I was doing that. But my theology changed in
Mm.
seminary, and I wasn't sitting well with theologically speaking with the conservative upbringing, and so I was trying to
Yeah.
find another group of people that didn't shun conservatives, but also didn't shun liberals and progressives.
Right.
And so I was like, well, who invites everybody to the table? Well,
Ah, yeah.
here we are, Christian Churches, Disciples of Christ. And
Here we
so,
are.
yeah, and so that's basically how I got to be a chaplain with the disciples. And I'm still in the military, in the Air National Guard, serving as a chaplain, and I'm also a chaplain at a hospital, Trauma One Center called Truman Medical Center, which is our safety net hospital in Kansas City, Missouri.
Hmm.
So, and
Awesome.
that's where I'm at today.
So you have your hands full then.
I do.
Yeah. Well,
And go ahead.
yeah. We spent like 45 minutes just talking before recording about this, and now I want to ask him another 45 minutes worth of questions after what I already have written down. But we gotta save some time for. I'm sure he has other things to do. Talk about a spiritual practice that's been meaningful for you, or you might recommend to others.
Well, with Story Wagon, the whole focus of storytelling is the discipline that we're trying to help people with. Because, number one, in chaplaincy, especially military chaplaincy, we try to look at the whole person,
Mm-hmm.
and try to put in different domains of health. Spiritual health is just one domain, but it's interconnected with all like physical health, social
Yeah.
health, and mental health. And especially in a time such as a pandemic, being socially distant, quarantinings, and shelter in place kind of orders, really kind of got us away from connecting with people.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the best ways, and that one of the oldest practices, is storytelling.
Yeah.
Sitting there listening to somebody's story and sharing your own story with that person makes a deep social connection, a deep emotional connection, which in
Mm-hmm.
turns develops into a spiritual connection with one another. So um, that is the key thing that I think is one of the biggest spiritual disciplines that we can practice today.
That's good. That's
Remember
good.
I cardboard you like that?
My son likes it too. Well, let's talk more about Story Wagon.
Uh-huh.
Tell our listeners kind of how it came to be, like, and I don't how
Hey,
much
Dad.
logistics you want to share, but
I read the wagon in the military
it's your
vehicle.
wagon. Okay, Jose's gonna share his wagon.
Yeah, my wagon. Okay, so the
Okay,
story
my
wagon,
next
this
time, Dad. Right?
the the story wagon came about through my work in chaplaincy.
Where's your
So
iPad?
being in chaplain, we are in institutions. So military chaplains are in the military, hospital chaplains are in the hospital, prison chaplains in the prison. So a lot of our work is done in that institution. Well, just like what I see with church is that we need to get out of those institutions, out of those walls, to help people heal. Because I was seeing people coming through the doors of the hospital dealing with trauma, dealing with moral injury, dealing with issues of resiliency, and they wouldn't have countered this idea of spiritual health until they got to the hospital. And I was like,
Yeah, yeah,
we need to be proactive. And to me, a lot of the issues that we're dealing with, such as gun violence, sexual assaults, um, the police brutality, it's because people are no longer seeing each other as sacred or creations
yeah.
of God. And so to bring back that sacredness into one another, teaching people about spiritual health uh, helps, I think, would help better the world in that way. Not necessarily professing Christ, even though I'm a Christian, but
Right.
just meeting people and say, hey, you are a spiritual person, and that person, your neighbor's a spiritual person.
Hmm.
Let's start to recognize that. Let's get connected together. So that's how Story Wagon came about. And so I was like, okay, so what's the best vehicle or way to get
Yeah, I was just gonna
Get
ask
the word out.
about that. You gotta share that.
Yeah, yeah. And it's when I think of peace and love and happiness, I think of the 70s, I think of the hippies,
Yeah.
and a lot of my childhood was growing up in California, Southern California, and the VW bus is like, well, VW in general, bugs, buses, Type 3s, they're very popular in California. And so I just remember I want to bring that, I want to bring that peace and love and happiness today. So uh, found a VW bus in California and like, hey, let's make it into a recording
Mhm.
studio.
Yeah. Now, this is a question I have. Does
hmm
the bus run?
Yes, it does
Okay,
run.
so
Right,
it runs.
right now it's um in the shop getting the roof fixed because it had
Okay.
like
Hi,
a leak
Daddy.
in the roof.
I'm
And but we do have it run, and we took it up to General Assembly uh,
Right.
and
Right.
drove it up there. So
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I sat in it. So General Assembly, for those unaware, is the kind of national gathering for the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, and he had Story Wagon there, and it was just it was just such a cool thing. So talk me through, like, I don't know what, obviously
Dad.
COVID has been its own
You're
thing, but
gonna
like,
die.
what have you done? Do you like drive it in neighborhoods,
I'm
to
driving as I'll
locations?
die,
mhm.
Dad.
Yeah, so since COVID hit, as you know, the military was very active and is very active, and the distribution of the vaccine and trying to set up hospitals and things like that. So I was activated actually during COVID. And so for the past 182 days, I've been in Germany doing chaplaincy stuff there, helping the Air Force, with the spiritual health aspect of what we need to do.
Hmm.
So I haven't been doing any kind of driving on the bus.
Hmm. You've been busy. You've been
Y-
busy.
Yeah, yeah, but we kept up on like producing resources. So we have a
Right.
podcast where
Right.
we talk about some of these deep issues within spiritual health, grief, and resiliency. So I've been doing that. I recorded some episodes over in Germany with local folks there. So I think all in all, it helps people to hear other people's stories and how they're dealing with certain issues and connect and be like, hey, maybe I need to try what they are doing, or I need to find help somewhere else, that sort of thing. So
Yeah. Yeah. Do you mind, obviously, names and details we want to keep confidential, but can you share some of the ways you've seen it impact people?
yeah, so uh, there's been one episode that I know that it's really helped a lot of people, and well, there's a few. So one was about perinatal bereavement,
Hmm.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
talking about the male side of things. So
Yeah.
that episode, there was actually a few guys that reached out to me and said,
Wow.
"I'm glad you had that episode." Even though Tabitha Johnson was the speaker, she's a pastor here in Kansas City, Missouri, and she's
Uh-huh.
written about this. But she spoke about her own husband going through this perinatal bereavement, and
Wow.
as men, we really don't get to talk about that a lot. You
Yeah.
know, and so these men kind of reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'm so glad that she mentioned something about it, and you guys are talking about this. Is there any other ways that we can get more resources and things like that?" So, um, yeah, so that was like one way of that. So, like when you have an issue and you are able to verbalize it, that's when you can start helping yourself and helping other people with it. So, um,
Yeah, that's so good, Jose. I know, my wife and she lost a pregnancy, and it was fairly early on, but still, it's just so weird. Like, just the whole process was just so weird and hard, but
mhm,
because at least in my experience, it was so early on. It was, it was like it's hard to even get your mind around.
mhm.
Um, yeah, but that sounds like a great resource. You've kind of touched on this already, but share if you can, just to kind of about the power of storytelling and sharing our stories.
Right. So for instance, just with the perinatal bereavement, it allows to name things when you're storytelling, like if
Hmm.
people are talking about a certain thing, and some people, when they're able to tell their story, they're able to make sense and meaning out of whatever happened to them. You know,
Yeah.
uh, and this is good work, like in trauma work. If you're
Hmm.
and you know we've done a little bit work of trauma informed care and talked about it within the Story Wagon community. But just to let your listeners know, majority of you have dealt with trauma some way, some form,
Yeah.
as a child. And even now, all of us collectively are dealing with this trauma called
Right.
COVID-19.
Right.
And so sometimes when we're not able to come up with the words, it causes more anxiety. It
Hmm.
causes other
Yeah.
mental health issues such as depression and things of that nature. And so, and then the spiritual health issues could be like a loss of hope,
Yeah.
moral injury, things of that nature. And so, storytelling helps people bring words to that event or to these events, to these feelings, and it just allows a healing process to begin.
Yeah. Quick for our listeners, for those unfamiliar, tell about moral injury.
Yeah. So, moral injury is basically an event that transgresses your morals.
Hmm.
So, a lot of people, there's been a lot of study through the Veterans Affairs in this issue because of the war uh,
Yeah.
that we've had for a very long time. And a
Yeah.
lot of soldiers and sailors and Marines and airmen were coming back with post traumatic stress disorder.
Hmm.
And they would go through the evidence based treatments, and but they were still dealing with this issue. And the psychiatrists and psychologists were like, well, why is this thing still going on? And so Jonathan Shea, who is the a Dr. Jonathan Shea, he is a professor over at I think the University of Pennsylvania,
Okay.
and he was doing some studies on Vietnam veterans, and he wrote a book called uh, Odysseus in America,
Hmm.
and he came up with this term called moral injury, and talking about how these soldiers were coming back from Vietnam and may have done things that were against their moral code. And even though they were going through these treatments, that they were still suffering from uh, like anger issues, anxiety, grief or guilt,
Hmm.
shame, things of that nature. And so he coined the term moral injury. And so
Yeah.
uh, fast forward a little bit, Dr. Rita Nakashima Brock wrote Soul Repair and was talking about it from a spiritual health perspective. Um, so that's as a chaplain, I was very interested in this, especially during my time at the Mortuary Affairs in Dover Air Force Base and dealing with the airmen that were struggling there, and working with the families and things like of that nature. And
Yeah.
while I was doing hospital chaplaincy, I was seeing some of these same symptoms from gunshot wound victims,
Interesting.
people who were experiencing sexual violence,
Hmm.
sexual assaults, and things like that. And it's like, oh yeah, of course, moral injury is going to happen to people who are in these situations. So yeah, so that's why Story Wagon, we focus all of this on this, because I think it's a topic that we need to kind of like share for everybody.
Let me dive into that a little bit more if I can. I'm
Hmm.
thinking of, have you ever seen the Clint Eastwood movie Gran Torino?
Yeah, it's been a long time since I've seen it.
I, that's a movie that I didn't watch that actually for a seminary class, but that's a movie that comes to mind when I think about moral injury.
Uh-huh.
In the way I don't remember what his character's name was. As I remember, at least, he was so kind of guilt ridden
Mm,
by what he had done in the Korean War,
yeah.
and in some ways, the end of the movie, at least as I understood it, was about kind of him making amends, um,
Mm,
sacrificing himself for his kind of transgressions. Uh,
mm-hmm.
really kind of interesting story. I also wonder. if I'm hearing you right, it sounds like moral injury can it's not just something that happens on the battlefield. It can happen in all areas of life. And there's a story that comes to mind in my own life, and I've never really connected it with moral injury, but I sort of wonder, like once I was working in a call center for a credit card company, and I
Mm,
remember like someone called and was like, "Hey, I was in the hospital, or my family was in the hospital, something like that." And my I made a late payment. Can you refund my fee? And in that company, it was only like if they were a profitable customer or whatever. And I remember like of course they asked to speak to a supervisor, and I remember like we didn't actually give them a supervisor. We just like transferred that to someone else within the department. And I
mm,
remember one of these my like more senior coworkers. He took it and he's like, "Hey, you did the right thing." And I just like knew deep in my heart and soul I did not do the right thing, and that sat with me so long.
mm, mhm.
Is that fair? Is that kind of
No, yeah,
hmm,
that's exactly what we're talking about. And just to kind of give you another, like, so there's the perpetrator
mm-hmm,
that actively transgresses. There's the uh, perpetrator that allows something to happen and doesn't do anything about it. So there are those types of folks that suffer from moral injury. But then
mm-hmm,
there's the bystander, and
hmm,
then
yeah,
there's the victim or the survivor. And so those are the four categories that moral injury can happen. So a lot of times we were focusing on perpetrators. So
mm-hmm,
people going to war, they actively engage in combat, kill somebody, come back, and they're dealing with that. What you're talking about is the perpetrator that didn't do anything,
mm-hmm,
uh,
yeah,
you just kind of passed it along, sort of thing. And
right,
I heard a story of a lawyer that had struggled with the same thing, where they were the lawyer of an insurance company,
mm-hmm,
and they were defending their insurance company against this person that was claiming for medical bills. And by
mm-hmm,
all rights, that this person deserved that money, but their lawyer wasn't arguing for the right thing, and this guy knew
mm-hmm,
which thing that this lawyer should be
yeah,
arguing for them to win. Well, ultimately, the plaintiff lost.
mm-hmm,
And so, even though the guy was doing his job, protecting his client, he still felt this guilt, this
yeah,
shame that, because his moral was the rule of law, that justice
right,
should prevail. And
right,
he worked against that, and so he was suffering from moral injury. And
mm,
it's just like people who witness sexual assaults or abuse
mm-hmm,
when they're younger, through trauma, they often feel deep guilt and shame because they couldn't do anything about it. They were
yeah,
bystanders,
yeah.
you know? So, just expanding out this idea of moral injury and what ways it can permeate into a person's life, you know, uh, can help.
It's really good. It's really good. So I'm wondering, like, the storytelling then function as almost a confessional. I mean, is that even a fair
Yeah, it can
correlation?
function or lament.
Lament,
So
yeah.
yeah, so there's lots of other practices. Even gratitude shows up in storytelling.
Oh, okay.
So the practice of gratitude. So we talk about all these spiritual disciplines,
Mm-hmm.
and we try to isolate them, but they're not siloed. I mean, they're integrated
Mm-hmm.
one another, and so. Um, but the act of storytelling allows us to really deepen those together, in community. And that's the biggest thing with storytelling. It's about community,
Mm-hmm.
uh, community developing and connection. And so, uh, yeah, that's why I love storytelling.
Yeah. Well, let me ask some kind of logistical questions, perhaps. Again, I'm thinking, we're kind of coming out of COVID as we're recording this. What month are we in? In May?
Yeah,
May.
month of May.
I think. And in my context, churches are starting to slowly regather, some at least. Hopefully, by the time this comes out, as you're listening, you'll be back in person, barring some kind of crazy, you know, spike or variant, whatever. What do you think? Because there's all this conversation about what does post-COVID church need to look like? We need to re-examine and re-understand what church is going to be. What opportunities do you think do you see for churches to integrate more storytelling opportunities?
Mm. Yeah, so one of the things that I think we need to get back to is like getting back to the basics. So like these, when COVID first came out, I was hearing the stories of development of these pods of
Mm-hmm.
people,
Right.
you know, and I was like, oh wow, what a creative way to kind of keep that social health going,
Mm-hmm.
having those pods of folks. Um, you know, when people are starting to meet outside, we're talking about environmental health, uh, because
Yeah.
we need to go outside, we need to connect with nature and that sort of thing. So like just getting back to that, because before, in my mind, the church was so focused on Sunday centric worship services,
Yeah. Yep.
right? Maybe they would have a program of Bible study or a program of
Small groups.
discipleship. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was a program. It wasn't like, like something that it's felt mechanical
Mm-hmm.
versus organic and a process of relationship building and development. Um, so like I think COVID, the pandemic just made churches stop in its tracks and
Mm-hmm.
for us to really think, okay, what is the essential part of being church? Not doing church, but being church.
Yeah.
So just getting back to those organic processes is I think the way that we need to go.
Yeah. So I think what if I can, what would that look like practically speaking? Like I'm wondering, like on a Sunday morning, like this is something that I was trying to do in my church towards the end of COVID, or was like I'd give a message, and but rather I'd give some questions at the end of my message, then invite people on Zoom to discuss that. Like, what do you
Mm,
think, could that be a thing for church where it could be a there could be a Sunday morning event, experience, whatever word we want to use, worship
yeah.
service,
Uh-huh.
but rather than just being all talking and lecture and preaching, there actually
Yeah.
be like there's a message given and it's like, hey, let's break up and discuss it.
Right. Yeah. That's a good question because I mean that's a question that we're dealing with the church that I planted. It's called Missio KC,
Yeah.
and one of the things that we're really focusing on is like how do we develop the rhythms back,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And,
Yes.
and so like how do we get back to uh, uh, you know recreating with one another? How do we get back to eating with one another? How do we get back to and and as people are getting more vaccinations and people are getting uh, the the herd immunity, quote unquote,
Yep.
uh,
Yep.
how do we get back to those places? Because to me, that's where the message. You can talk about the message and you have a Sunday service event, but to really live it out is living it out rhythmically in life, the
Hmm.
everyday, the ordinary, not the ordained day, that sort of thing. So um, yeah, that's what we're trying to figure out because it's important to gather and it's important to
Hmm.
um, preach the word and talk about Jesus in a Christian context.
Hmm.
Um, and for us, it's like, okay, so how do we incarnate that in today's world safely for
Hmm.
everybody
Yeah.
and things like that. So I like your idea of that. What we're going to probably plan on doing is throwing out like a short podcast and
Hmm.
then separating out into these small groups, uh, neighborhood centric sort of thing, and
Yeah. Yeah.
um, live life through that,
Right.
and having meals together and having prayer
Hmm.
together and blessing one another and all the rhythms that we need to have in life, just in a smaller context and be decentralized.
Yeah. One of those, this is a story that I probably shared on this podcast before, but I think about like it's been 15 months since I've been to a gym probably.
Mm,
And I was like a 4 to 5, like going to the gym person. And now I'm like, I have my COVID shot. should I think about, I could go to the gym. I used to like going to the gym. Do I want to go to the gym?
Yeah.
Speaking of getting back into those rhythms, but I've so adapted and retrained myself that I almost have to like rethink when is going to be my gym time. What's that going to look
Mm,
like?
mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. Well, yeah, I'm also struck. I wanted to just highlight this too, Jose, because I was thinking about what you said about lament,
Mm,
and I'm sure that you can, as a chaplain, would feel the same way. But I think about how much you said it, trauma there's going to be from these past 12, 15 months, and how much our society is going to want to just kind of rush back into quote unquote normal.
mm-hmm.
I'm struck by the importance of making space for lament in church. And again, I mean, you know this probably just as well, it's not better than me, that so often churches just don't make, like, that's not a thing. Like, it's just like, praise Jesus, God is good, and hallelujah.
Mm, mm-hmm. Yeah. So like for yeah, and I think the church needs to get back to that. We need
Yeah.
to get back to this idea of like we are a spiritual health place,
Mm,
where people
yeah.
can find healing and compassion. And so helping churches develop language, that's another reason why Story Wagon's around, is that we want to help religious communities and spiritual communities develop that language so that people can start naming the things that they're feeling. So one of the
Yeah.
biggest things that we've talked about is disenfranchised grief during this
Hmm.
pandemic.
Yeah.
A lot of things changed for a lot of people, but some people are not recognizing it because it might be small in people's eyes, and so they won't allow
Right.
themselves to grieve for it.
Right.
So, like
Right.
you're talking about not going to the gym. I mean, that is a change in your life. That's a
Yeah.
transition in your life that
Yeah.
a lot of people that was their community. Like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
know in when I was in Germany, they're really strict on their lockdown
Hmm.
and their social distancing, and so
Right.
all the martial art groups could not meet together.
Hmm.
And for a lot of people within the Air Force and the military, uh, the the Brazilian Jiu Jitsu group that I normally worked out with over there, that was their family. That was the connections that we were making, and they were feeling this tenseness or this uh, conflict in themselves. Like, well, I really miss those people. I
Yeah.
really miss my friends, but I need to suck it up and drive on because everybody's dealing with this. Well, no, you can grieve for it. It's called disenfranchised grief. And so just allowing that kind of language. The other thing I've been helping people understand is about ambiguous loss and frozen
Mm.
grief
Yeah.
during the pandemic. A lot of patients at the hospital that I was working at, they could not visit their families in the hospital because of the lockdown, especially in the beginning. And so their family members passed. And when you're dealing with ambiguous loss, you know in your head
Yeah.
that this person's gone, but
Yeah.
you haven't seen them. You don't get to say your last goodbyes or nothing.
Hmm.
There's no closure, and so it
Right.
freezes the grieving process. And so ambiguous loss happens. And so like when people started hearing that language and like, oh, that's what I'm experiencing, you
Yeah.
know, um, you can see like this liberation happen for them.
Man, this is such good stuff, Jose. I appreciate you sharing this. I'm just thinking about, of course, disenfranchised grief, and I'm thinking about, man, the ambiguous loss and the frozen grief. I think makes so much sense. I'm thinking about, there's been so much, obviously, so much turmoil and disruption over the last year, and I think back to so much of the racial justice stuff during the summer, and
Mm,
I know, especially for me, I think as a white man, I think it was hard to try to find that I don't know if balance is the right word, um,
mm,
but because obviously, like, I don't know, this is just a hard pastoral care thing, I guess I would, from my perspective, I'd say, Jose, is like acknowledging and grieving for huge injustices happening in the world, and especially like our nation experienced over the summer with so much of the injustice toward African American persons. But then, like you said, it, yeah, it can be so hard to try to make space for then your own kind of
Hmm.
mourning and grieving, like you're talking about.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, there's a lot of grief happened because of that, and then also the political environment.
yeah.
So many families have been separated, not only
Mhm.
physically, but ideologically,
Yeah. Yeah.
and the only communication that would have been done was over electronic means, so Facebook,
Right.
Twitter, blah blah blah, and it's caused a lot of rifts in families, and so
Yeah.
there's a lot of moral injury that occurred because maybe you saw this person as a role model, or
Hmm.
and now they're saying these ideologies. Maybe they're just repeating it, but all of a sudden now it's like, that's totally against what I believe, and we can't,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you start arguing on Facebook, and then it just leads to separation. And now you grieve for that person, even though you might not recognize it yourself, that you're grieving that relationship.
Mm.
You might be saying to your head, "Oh, good riddance. I didn't need that person in my life." But
Right. Right.
that person helped develop you, or that person was an important part of your life, and now you don't have them. You can grieve, but you're not allowing yourself to grieve. And so all this anger and resentment and just all this emotional stuff is just like locked inside, and it's just causing all kinds of issues for people.
Man,
And
that's so good. I'm just thinking of like my high school instrumental in my, in my growth and ministry career, even like
Mhm.
it's kind of gone off the deep end. I won't say for our listeners, but you can probably get a sense. And it's just been kind of hard to see.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, well, we could keep on going. Let's take a quick break and we'll come
Okay.
back with closing questions. Do you need a minute or are you good?
Yeah, I need to get a drink and check on my wife. She
Okay.
just came back. So hold on one sec.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, I'm back.
Cool. All right, I'll launch us back in. All right,
Okay.
we're back with Jose Martinez, and Jose, I tell folks, you can take these closing questions as seriously or not as you'd like to.
Uh-huh.
But if you're Pope for a day,
Pope
what
for
do
a
you want to
day.
do? What does that day look like? That kind of thing.
Hmm. Well, if I could have the clout of the Pope for a day, I
Yeah.
definitely would want with meet with all the religious leaders that I possibly could that
Okay.
day, and talk about approaching spiritual health in the future
Mm-hmm.
for people. That's one of the key things. I think the Pope has that kind of clout.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. Give a theologian or historical Christian figure you'd want to meet or bring back to life.
Mm. Wow, that's a real good one because there's so many people that I would want to meet. I think the main person, since I just got back from Germany, is
Hmm.
Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, he had so many great ideas, and I think if he would have lived past the war, that the church would have been shaped differently because of his ideas.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Um, what do you think history will remember from our current time and place?
Um on the positive side, that we were adaptable
Mm-hmm.
and that we were able to rise to a challenge relatively quickly to help as many people's, even though the situation's still dire
Yeah.
in other countries also. And so it's
Right.
like, but we've innovated so quickly to develop
Mm-hmm.
this vaccine. um, on a negative note, they they will remember how stratified we were, separated,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
yeah,
That's good. What are your hopes for the future of Christianity?
that we adapt and that we connect and understand that the church isn't dying, the church is transforming.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the biggest message that we need to hear
Yeah.
as Christians, is that the church isn't dying because we're losing buildings and stuff. The church is just transforming. And God is already at work in this world through
Hmm.
different movements. They
Yeah.
might not be Christian movements,
Sure. Yeah.
but God is in there nonetheless.
Yeah. That I every time I hear that, I just reaffirm to people that's basically an answer that I've heard again and again from people, and there's something there, Jose. There's something there because people are seeing that. They're seeing that, and they're
Hmm.
sensing that. Well, where can folks find out more about Story Wagon and yourself?
Yeah, so you can reach us at our website, storywagon.org. Make sure you spelled wagon Wagen. And
Mm-hmm.
people say, well, you spelled it's Wagen, but it's because we have a Volkswagen bus.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so so storywagon.org. We can be found on social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and for myself, noonchurchministry.org. You can
Mm-hmm.
find how to connect with me on there. Uh, so J Martinez at newchurchministry.org is a good place to go. So if you're interested in the spiritual health, the community spiritual health stuff, or in new church ministry stuff, just please reach out to me and I'll answer as soon as I can.
Awesome. Yeah, and who knows? He's got a lot going on, so it will be as soon as he can with all that. So, thanks so much, Jose. Really enjoyed the conversation. Appreciate your perspectives, and may God's peace be with you.
And also with you.
All right.